As we live in the modern world today, promiscuous lifestyle seems to be the way of life. You see it on television, you see it in commercials, you see it in what's going on in the community around you. But is that God's way? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Welcome back to our study as we look at Proverbs chapter 7. When we finished last time with chapter 6, it was an interesting study into warning against the daily life's trials that often take us down. And then into chapter 8, it goes into a little bit more of what's called wisdom, calls for hearing. When we think of wisdom, it's a combination of knowledge and understanding. Let me explain it this way. I have a 9-year-old grandson. He knows not to go running out into the road. That's knowledge. Because if he runs out into the street to play and gets hit by a car, he knows he's going to get squished. That's understanding. So you take knowledge and understanding, blend them together, and you come up with wisdom. The problem in our society today is that most people have a little bit of knowledge. They've learned some school things. They have some understanding, but their understanding is often dwarfed or bent by whatever society has told them to do. Therefore, wisdom is out the window. Wisdom usually doesn't come until a person's like 25 or 30. People look at my white hair and they say, wow, you got lots. I said, every one of them's a little bit of wisdom over the years. Every one of them's a little bit of learning and understanding and raising a family. But what happens here in this particular passage is it's a warning against immoral women. I teach in prison ministry, as does Gary, that's with our study tonight. And we're going to draft James one of these days to begin teaching inside of prison walls. But this is something the guys understand. Of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wives, having children, 5 children, each of them by a different wife, just living an immoral life. And this chapter we have studied many times, and it takes on so much root and so much meaning. James, you teach a group of men. How does this chapter 7 of Proverbs line up?
One of the most regular studies that we have done is the study on lust issues. We do that study every so many years. We usually get led to do that study by somebody being in the throes of multiple relationships, pornography addiction. We talked about where those things stem from. We go down the path. We have a week of media fast, and what we mean by that is we don't watch any TV or listen to anything questionable. We don't try to pay attention to anything that has to do with the sins of the world. And during that week, it's kind of funny because it has almost the reverse thing that happens, where they notice it more, they see it more, and it's now that you're attuned to the fact that you have not been purposefully choosing to not take in questionable habits and things, that you actually realize that you just accept all of these things. One of the speakers of the study that we use, he uses a term called gownless evening strap instead of a strapless evening gown, because the clothes that people wear are so, they show everything. And during that media fast, I'll have guys come in and say, I was looking at girls that I never look at, because I was aware that I couldn't look at girls that I normally just can look at. And it's this, you become attuned to the problem. And then when it comes back, they then also realize just how damaging normal television is. Just normal magazines that you open, the things that are tempting you and the places that they're tempting you at. And it's pretty crazy. One guy pointed out to me that it was like the internet and Satan was stalking him. because he would go to a place to look up a lumber, and there'd be meet local singles, on the side rail, and it would be some voluptuous looking lovely lady that it's tempting him to go and look at other things, and just making that covenant with your eye and saying, I'm not going to look on somebody with lust, and all of those things. And this is one of the whole passages that we study in that same study as well.
And it boils into a package in the fact that I, one time several years ago, had an inmate that had been down for a second time for child molestation. He was going to be in prison a long time this time. And as we were visiting, he said, well, I don't really have a lot of problems with lust. I love watching television. I thought, bing, bing, bing. And he said, and I love reading romance books. Bing, bing, bing. Okay, what are you doing? You're feeding your appetite of adultery. Gary?
Well, I'm also kind of a little bit involved with Celebrate Recovery. And one of the things that they try to point out to people is that there are certain things that are triggers that can trigger your ungodly behaviors. So once you can identify some of those triggers, you need to try to put a block against those things. I mean, even with me, all men struggle with lust. I've heard it said, people that are your age, Lynn, they said it never goes away. I mean, when you see an attractive woman, that's just part of our nature. But even with my Bible reading that I use on the internet, I have to change the size of my screen font so it goes real large, because off to the side they want to throw these ads up all the time, and they'll have beautiful young women just modeling clothes or shoes.
That's when I scoot the page over.
That's what I mean. I have to do the same. You can't even focus on reading a Bible app on the internet. It's just everywhere today, and it's straight out of the enemy's playbook.
We will go to, I have some friends that I am accountability brothers with, and they have issues that are different than my issues that we try to help with. We all have certain issues, but we'll go to see a movie, and right in the middle of it, there'll be this whole scene about drug use in a movie that had nothing to do with drug use. And immediately, the other guy that I'm sitting with and the guy that I'm there with the accountability watching the movie with, we look at each other, great, because now he's triggered, because he has an addiction to those things. Yeah. And it's like, we cannot imbibe any media that is just mainstream media, and not just mainstream media. Some media that's considered Christian media will have a scene that's like that in it. And then my other friend has a gambling addiction, and he will see something that has, you want to put a couple dollars on a hole of golf? That triggers him. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, how do we fight against an enemy that's putting things in front of us so regularly and so often, and it's just so rampant? Well, the Word, how we put those bulwarks in place that block us from those things, or know what our trigger is and where to go after the trigger happens. One of the examples I know from a guy that I'm dealing with is, he's a baby daddy to a woman and another woman, and he knows that both of them basically just used him as a baby daddy because he makes good money. And they knew that if they got pregnant with the guy, they would have more money. Yeah. And he's now in a position where he just has to agree, this is what I've done, this is where I stand now, I have to help provide for those children. I don't really get to have much contact with those children, and I don't really want to have contact with these women. But I put myself in this position, and to do what God would want me to do, I have to be in this horrible situation, and it's sad.
One time I had a great opportunity to teach this chapter 7. When on a Tuesday night Bible study, when I was teaching that Tuesday night, there happened to be one of those clothing store shows, I won't mention the name of the company, of where the women wear very little. My Bible study, I think, went from 60 people to 15. So the next week, guess what I got to teach on? Proverbs chapter 7. As we begin this, it's interesting, within the first 5 verses, he's pointing out the necessity. My son, keep my words, store them up. Second verse, keep my commands, guard my teachings. Third, bind them on your fingers, bind them on the tablet of your heart. Verse 4, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and insight, you are my relative. So here he's beginning to say, pay attention to what you're doing and embrace wisdom and understanding in your life.
Well, what's really important right here is when he says, write them on the tablet of your heart, because that's basically, there's that connection between your heart and your mind, and that's where your sin really starts at, when you start thinking about things that are in your heart. You know, I've used the phrase before, junk in, junk out. If you can just fill your mind continuously with like the Word of God or things that are more godly, you're less likely to be vulnerable to those type of things. You know, if you look at Ephesians 6, putting on the full armor of God, and you go through all the different pieces of armor, but the very last it says, stand firm and pray.
Having all this to do, stand.
Stand, yeah.
And it's very hard to be in that position. And the things that are said here are still things, well, that's the reason we're reading them, are still things that we just don't practice enough that could be helpful, very helpful. Nowadays, you have so many of these memes, whatever people want to call them on a Tuesday, that actually are pretty helpful, because it says, she ain't dating you because she's into you. She knows you got money, right? And if you had a bracelet on your hand that said, she wants your money, right? That is helpful. And he's saying here, take these commands. Don't sleep with that kind of woman. Stay away from this kind of person. And you wrote it on the back on your fingers, so that you're like talking to somebody and like, yeah, no, I shouldn't talk to you, right? You were obviously here to mess with me. It would be helpful, and it is helpful to be with another buddy that goes, no, man, no. It helps so much.
Well, most of us guys need a gal, and I love what Max Lucado said one time. Was that Max Lucado? Anyhow, one of the evangelists, he literally said, my wife is my guardian. And she said, if your eyes offend me, I will pluck them out.
That's a great joke. It's true.
If you mess with that. No, it was John Maxwell, that's who it was, the other Max. But when you're getting into this kind of stuff, wisdom here, he's calling for them to pay attention, wisdom, and us guys, and I'm going to be honest, you all watching on television, and maybe you're an inmate in a prison, pay attention to the gal that comes after you, comes on to you. I remember as a teenager one time, I was living on my own, had my own car, went out, and this gal all of a sudden gets into my car, blonde hair, slides over next to me. That's back before bucket seats. And I thought, uh-oh, well, she got dumped real quick. I thought, this is not going to work at all. I had been raised in the church, and I understood the signs, because verse 6 starts to begin to describe, at the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I could have put the word stupid there. I noticed among the young men, the youth who had no sense. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading, as the dark night set in. So here we have a descriptive of a television sitcom. Is that a good way to put it? Comments?
Well, the problem in our society today, I think, is people don't know the difference between love and lust.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been guilty of that in my past, and I can see it's easier for me to give that kind of advice now, because I made the same kind of mistakes before. You think you're having a sexual relationship with somebody that you met relatively recently, and you think, oh, well, you think that this is really love, and it generally it's not. It's a lusting thing, and those type of sexual relationships are actually, they're selfish, because you're there to please yourself. You're not actually trying to please the other person, because that takes true love. And Paul gives us the example in 1 Corinthians 13. So if you ever want to know what the definition of love is, well, he breaks it down, and it takes him a whole chapter to try to explain that.
Yeah, and anybody that comes to me with things like that Bible doesn't have anything to say to me, it doesn't talk about anything to me, it has no life application whatsoever, you can go right to this chapter. You can go right to this chapter. You can go back to Hagar. You can go back to Leah and Rebecca. You can go to so many stories, and it's like an episode of Jerry Springer. It's like an episode of exactly where we are today. And this is a perfect example. Any guy out there who's ever been in a bar and has ever watched a girl working the bar and trying to go to bed with somebody at the bar has seen this situation. Which guy in here looks like the mark? Which guy is the guy that's good looking but dumb? He's going to put himself in a bad situation. And if you haven't seen that guy and you have been in the bar, you are that guy.
Yep.
And when you get out, you're going to go look for a girl, and you're going to go right back down that street. That's her street, her house, her direction. And you just need to put something between you and that decision, because it is. I have a friend that used to be in my men's Bible study class, and he went all the way down that path, and he ended up in a situation where he was addicted to drugs with a girl. He wasn't doing drugs at the beginning. She was a girl that was doing drugs. He knew she was doing drugs, but he was able to have sex with her. So it became an addiction and a habit, and then now he's in the same situation where recovery is hard for him, and he's continuously going back to recovery groups. Mm-hmm. It is truly a trap.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have taught many times in Bible study and asked this question: when you're looking for a wife, do you go to the bar or do you go to the church? And of course, most of the guys are saying, well, yeah, we go to the bar because we find quick sex. Well, that's not where you find someone you want to raise your children. You need to look at a little bit deeper, and we get into this study. Gary?
If you're a believer and you're looking to get out and you're looking for a relationship with someone, one of the first questions I ask people that I'm counseling with that are trying to get into a relationship is this person that you're wanting to go out with, is this person going to help draw you closer to your relationship with the Lord, or are they going to pull you further away? Mm-hmm. That should be one of the first questions you ask. And if you can't honestly answer that question, that this person is going to help me have a better relationship with God, then that person probably isn't really for you. That falls into the category of maybe being unevenly yoked.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I even go with that same direction. I go down another path of, don't you want to be a good man if you do find a good woman who you're trying to sleep with? Like, trying to go down that path, and she's a girl you met at church and she is somebody you want to be in a good relationship, keep it pure. Get married. Get to know her. And it's easy to end up in a sexual relationship, so much so it's like, no, don't you want her to be what she's supposed to be to God? Don't you want to help not allow that to happen because you're so tempted by her body? And there's a whole nother path there of trying to help a man become a man of good intent and character.
Verse 10 down through the rest, verse 20, describes this lady and what happened, and it's interesting. The indication here is that she was a religious person. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute with a crafty intent. Mm-hmm. She's unruly, defiant, feet never stay at home, now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. Verse 13, she took hold of him, kissed him. With a brazen face she said, today I have fulfilled my vows. I have food for my fellowship from my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you and I found you. I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt, expensive. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. We need to talk about this fellowship offering. Theologically, at that time, if you offered a peace offering and there was meat left over at the altar, you could take it home and eat it. Mm-hmm. Indication is she'd been to church. Mm-hmm. Comments?
She's milking the church for free things. She's using society's free things to keep her own lifestyle going, which is something we see rampant. That still happens today on like every case. You're walking around using all of these things to try to help you survive, but you're actually using them because you know that you can live off the system. And then you're living off the system and you're preying upon men, and women are being preyed upon too in the same similar situations. It's exactly what we do today.
Yeah.
And when people do read this and they read it for what it is, they're like, that's like it is today. And it's like, yeah, that's the point.
That's exactly similar to what Paul tried to warn the Ephesian elders in, I think it's Acts chapter 21. That he says that ravenous wolves are going to come from within. You know, and this is kind of an example of that too. You have to be careful, even people that you meet in the church, because until you get to know somebody, you really don't know what their intentions are, just because they're coming to church. And we had an example of that happen, you know, recently in my church. It's just a new guy comes in there and he meets a young gal that's real friendly and tries to minister to him. The next thing I know, they're out on the second time they see each other. He wants to get married. She says no, and he has a fit. You know, so you really don't know. You know.
Well, I remember as a young person in my 20s that I was looking for a bride that was a Christian, that was a good cook, that was from a stable family. And when I found her and started going to church with her, the people at the church said, "You got to watch out for that McBride. He's just trying to steal her away from the church." Well, I wasn't trying to steal her away from the church. I was trying to get in the church with her because it was good. But anyhow, then it goes on, verse 18. "Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Blah, 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 blah. My husband's is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He has his purse. He's not going to be home. And so come on, let's have an affair." So she just becomes outwardly blatant instead of religious and trying to persuade him. And that's what the verse 21 says. With persuasive words, she led him astray.
See, we also got to remember when Solomon wrote this, he had a lot of different wives, right? And these wives came from different religious systems. And a lot of the religious systems at this time, the false ones, they involved sexual rituals. That was part of their religion.
In the tabernacle.
In their temples. I mean, they had hundreds of prostitutes, and that was part of their religious system. And he's just trying to go again, you know, warn against this type of behavior.
And it's today, the verse back here at, let's see, 5, they will keep you from the adulteress, from the wayward wife with her seductive words. So much today, because we can't translate this into application today on many of the things that we're talking about, but we can translate it with what the heart is and what the mind is and what those things are. Internet. I have a friend, several churches ago, I have 2 friends that we were in a couples class with, and we heard about their struggles. And one of the struggles was she was just having conversations with people on Facebook. People being guys. Those guys would talk to her. Her husband wasn't a talky guy. He wasn't an emotional guy. You can't do that. You've got to stop living like that. 2 years later, they're divorced. She's with that guy, and our guy is now with someone else. But it was the writing of the wisdom here was on the wall. Mm-hmm. You cannot be seduced by somebody else and their interest in you and in a marriage and expect that marriage to last and have a good grounding and have something that you stay with. And trying to teach people to be different people after they've married each other is a lot of work. It's really hard. If you're not a guy that talks, I think somebody actually made a joke that, you married the Marlboro man. You married the guy, the toughest, quietest guy that just does his job and comes home and hands you the paycheck, and you now expect him to be one of your girlfriends and talk to you about all this stuff and how to make that happen.
Now let's take a look at verse 22. We see his, I don't want to use the word stupidity, naiveness, simpleness. All at once he followed her like an ox going to slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, until the arrows pierced his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. And then he concludes with verse 24 through 27. Now then, my son, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or strayed into her paths. Many are the victims she brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway. Oh, I like the way that says this. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Closing thoughts, Gary.
Well, maybe you've been watching this and you've been convicted right now by the Holy Spirit. Maybe you're thinking, well, I've done all these things. I've made all these kinds of mistakes. I've screwed up my relationships with my spouse, and now I'm separated from her, but we're still, trying to work something out. Well, I just want you to know that all the mistakes you made, all the sins you've committed, those have already been paid for at the foot of the cross. And Jesus is right there to offer you forgiveness. He's offering a way to go, to have a healing process. But all that we've been talking about is just to warn the person that has maybe never done this before. And if you've done it before, here's another warning: don't do it again, because it adultery and harlotry and those kind of things, that just tears the very fabric of our society up. And Satan knows that. And if you go all the way back into Exodus, when Moses was bringing the children of Israel out, and the very first time there was a man and a woman that were caught in adultery, they had to take them out.
They killed them.
They killed them.
Yeah. Gary's given us some good thoughts there as we close. And you need to say, Lord Jesus, forgive me of my sins. I believe you are the Son of God. And then begin following him and put some wisdom in your life. Thanks for being a part of our study. Write us. Tell us what's going on with you. God bless.